Well, welcome. I'd like to keep this kind of informal. We are going to take the questions at the end, but as a former classroom teacher, I like to move around, and they've got me tethered here to the microphone, so that's not too good. But what I'd like to do is talk just a little bit about how we in our research projects at WSU are trying to create some synergies between farming and ranching and cattle and so forth. Well, I was really impressed last year when I came to this conference, and there was a guy, one of the keynote speakers out there. He, in the big room, he was from Australia, and if anybody gets it, it's the Australians. How to create these connections between farming and cattle and all kinds of livestock. There's sheep and goats and whatever. And so it got me really thinking about how well they do, and we're doing better, but I think that there's a whole world out there that we can tap into to create these connections. And so this project that I'm going to talk about today, biennial winter canola for silage and seed, is kind of that follows that thought process. Okay, so traditionally winter canola is grown, for the oil. Essential 3 oils, we can go to the store, we can buy that right off the shelf. Canola meal is a really great product. In my world, we can use that as and so my friends over here are going to talk about different uses, but I can use that for protein supplements for the cows in the winter. I can use it for stockers on corn stalks. I can use it for dairy cows and TMR rations and so forth. Really a versatile product. But the research emphasis over the last 4 decades or so has been really how do we grow it for seed. And so my projects, pull in this animal component. Here's a table just to give a little bit of a idea of the chemical composition. As you see right up there at the top, the commercial canola meal, now that's a solvent extracted product, and you'll see down here at the bottom it's fairly low in fat. Now the on-farm processed canola meals, they're just run through a on-farm crusher, and they're fairly high products, and that's why you see that difference in protein, that some of that protein is displaced by the oils. Now on the one hand, the oil provides energy for the animal. On the other hand, the protein is what is our first limiting nutrient when we're feeding cattle and sheep and so forth on real low quality forages. So it kind of depends on what you're using it for as to what product. Either product's going to work good, but that's the difference. They're really a low fiber product. That's the NDF and the ADF, neutral detergent fiber and acid detergent fiber. Anytime we have NDFs of, 30, that's pretty low. And a subset of that, just the cellulose and the lignin and so forth, is the ADF. And when those are down around 20% of dry matter, those are pretty low too. So very digestible, total digestible nutrients, the TDN, running about 75%. So those really nice products. But we're here to talk about biennial winter canola. And so what is that? Okay? So what we do is we seed that canola in about August, winter canola. We harvest the forage crop in October. It regrows a little bit in the fall, and then finish its regrowth in the spring, and then we harvest canola for seed the following year. So we actually get a crop for the cows, and we get a crop for seed and oil, okay? So what do we expect with canola silage? Well, if we go back in the literature, we can find it's like 16, 70%, sometimes up to 20% crude protein, which is really high, very low in fiber. So if it's low in fiber, that tells us it's going to be probably a pretty highly digestible product. Fiber is not bad in itself because, as we know, ruminants can digest fiber. It's just to the degree at which they can digest it and how much of what we call anti-quality components like lignification and so forth, which are barriers to digestion, how much of that is in there. But from this standpoint, canola silage would be a pretty low fiber, high digestible product. Very high in moisture, and that gives us challenges when we go to ensile it. Okay, we have too much moisture in a fresh forage that we're going to try to ensile. That can perpetuate bacteria that are not beneficial, not just ones that will drive down the pH and preserve it, but other things that can make animals sick. So we have to be careful about that. When we also have a really high moisture product like this, seepage can be a problem. Imagine thousands and thousands of tons of silage in a bunker, and you have a really excess wet forage going in there. You'll have gallons and gallons and gallons of seepage coming off. And those are actually, would be pollutants and not good for the environment. So we're going to look at ways in this research of how to control that. And we might be able to do that with absorbents. There's been some research done actually at WSU in the late 1990s looking at absorbents to reduce seepage out of silage. Some of the things they've used for absorbents are layers of canola or other forages with drier feeds. You could use wheat straw or wheat straw pellets or hays. You could use newspaper for that matter if it didn't have ink on it. Ink, that gives a whole nother problem. But in this case, I'll show you, we're going to use alfalfa pellets. Ensiling reduces nitrate levels, so if you have a feed that's high in nitrate, which can be a detriment to livestock, ensiling is a good way to reduce it, sometimes 30 to 70%. We also, as a general practice, inoculate the silage just like you would corn silage when we put it up in the silos. Also, when I say canola silage could cause scours, I'm not talking about infectious scours as we think of in baby calves, okay? This is more just profuse diarrhea because it's so wet, just because of the composition of the feed. But it can be a problem because if it's making those cows that washy, you're going to probably have to limit the amount that you put in the diet to maybe 50 to 60% of dry matter. And I think Randy is going to talk about, you've done some grazing, right? And so maybe you can take that to the next step of what you've found as far as scours go. Also, sulfur can be an issue with canola. Canola accumulates sulfur at about 0.5% to even up to nearly 1.5% of dry matter. Now, the nutrient requirements for beef cattle, and also I'm pretty sure, I'd have to look it up, but I think the same toxicity level for dairy cattle in their dairy NRC is 0.4% of dry matter. So we need to make sure that whatever we do, we don't exceed 0.4% of the diet when we put any feed into to a TMR or a supplement or whatever. Can cause hemolytic anemia, inhibit trace mineral absorption, for instance, of copper and selenium, and that can have implications on intake, hair coat. Big one is reproduction, and of course, reproduction is between reproduction and feed costs. That's our main focus, in beef cows, is we've got to cover those two. Otherwise, we're sunk right from the start. Polioencephalomachia, PEM. It's hydrogen gas formation, hydrogen sulfide gas formation in the rumen, causes lesions in the brain, okay? Symptoms, cows staggering around, death because of too much sulfur. And these effects of sulfur are cumulative. Problem of it is that we sometimes have high sulfur waters. Now, I've never noticed it here, but when I lived in Kentucky, Every once in a while, you turn on the tap and you could smell sulfur. Okay? High sulfur water. I've been down to the Turner Ranch in Oklahoma. Sulphur, Oklahoma. They named the town after it. There's a swamp right in the middle of town. Smells like rotten eggs. Okay? So there is possibilities that you can have high sulfur in your water, and it will be additive to whatever you find in your feed. Okay, so the objectives of our biennial canola study, we're going to look at the fermentation characteristics, and we've just started, I'll back up, we've just started this project last summer. Depending on field rates of nitrogen and sulfur. So we're taking and I'll show you what the field treatments are, and then we're ensiling based on those nitrogen and sulfur rates. To determine the effect of absorbance to reduce effluent loss, and that's going to be, we've used alfalfa pellets, and to determine the composition of the silage effluent. In other words, what's in it? If we get all this water running off the silage, what's in it, and what kind of problems could that lead to? Okay, so here's the field treatments. Pardon me. We used Roundup Ready canola planted in August of 2014, and we'll repeat this in 2015 as well. 8 pounds of pure live seed per acre. The plot dimensions were 11 by 25 feet, and we had 4 reps per treatment. We had a third of the nitrogen and sulfur applied in the fall. 2/3 will be applied in the spring. Those are the nitrogen and sulfur rates, the 100 and 200 rate of nitrogen, 0, 20, and 40 on the sulfur. We want to track that sulfur to see if there's a problem with sulfur fertilization in the final product of the feed as well. P and K were based on soil tests. We harvested for the first year about October the 13th of 2014, and we'll harvest again in 2015 in October, and we cut it down to about a 4-inch height. Okay, so the silage treatments, like I said, our silage treatments follow the field treatments for nitrogen and sulfur, with or without absorbance, which are the alfalfa cubes. So we have 12 treatments, 4 reps, takes 48 mini silos, and I'll show you how those work here in just a second. We inoculate it with a whole lot of colony-forming units of lactic acid-producing bacteria. We pack 10 pounds of forage into those silos, and we put in enough absorbent to increase the dry matter content of that forage to about 35%. And we're starting with approximately 12%, okay? So a little over 20% of dry matter we have to add to that, because typically we shoot for about 35% dry matter when we do corn silage, and that's kind of the standard by which all other silages are compared. We allow it to ensile for about 45 days. 30 days will work, but we want to be sure we've got all the acid pulled down, or the pH pulled down in the silos. And it really doesn't matter. Once you get past about 45 days, if the weather turns bad and we can't empty the silos or whatever, it's stable. It should be good for months. So, okay, so what do we want to find out? We want to find out the forage quality. That's chemical composition. We're going to look at protein and the fibers, the NDF, ADF. We'll probably look at fats. We'll also look at the fermentation characteristics. We can tell a lot about how well the fermentation took place by looking at the pH and the different volatile fatty acids. We want to see a good bit of lactic acid in that, because that's the lactic acid bacteria is the one that pulls down the pH and therefore makes it an environment where other bacteria can't grow, and it's preserved. Okay? The rates and extent of degradation, we'll look at those through in situ degradability. We just take the forages. We'll do this after the second year, so we do both years all at the same time. We put them in little bags, samples, put them inside the cows. We can do 24 and 48-hour digestions. We can do a full digestion curve where we do 5 or 6 different time points and predict the actual digestibility rather than just doing it at time points. We can do that for fats and the NDF, ADF, proteins. And then the other thing that we think is really interesting that we want to look at is, does removal of the forage crop affect the seed, the oil, or the meal after it's harvested? And you'll understand that a little better when I show you the plots here. Okay, the plot harvest, we use a 3-foot wide forage harvester. This is some of our canola from October, and it comes out looking like a really nice little salad. Smells really good too. Okay, then what we do is we take that 10 pounds and it goes into the tube. In the bottom of the tube, we have rocks, a screen. We have to tamp. It's kind of like loading a cannon. We have to pound in 10 pounds and get it packed really tight to exclude the oxygen. And then a cap goes on, and then there's a thing called the bullet. It weighs like 20-some pounds, okay? 28 pounds, I think it is. It sets on the top and applies pressure. Okay, so what that does is that excludes the oxygen. We cap the top. It has a water-filled vent. Over there on the far right, where that one that has the tube, you can see it's green. That's a clear tube. The effluent is already starting out of those high moisture tubes. And so the ones that had the absorbent in it, we saw virtually nothing on the first day coming out of the tubes. And so that's where we are right now. The tubes are full. We just got them emptied. We have our fermentation analysis back, but basically we don't have our forage analysis for the chemical composition or anything ready to go. But that's the status. It's a 2-year project, and we're really excited about what the possibilities are and what it can do for producers. So anyway, I'll turn it over to the guys here, and we'll answer any questions you might have in a few minutes.
Good afternoon. My name's Randy Etman. I am a 4th-generation farmer from the Valley Ford area, which is just south of Spokane a little ways. We live in an area that receives about 18 inches of rain a year. And we have a small herd of cattle along with pretty diversified grain and legume, and we've started adding canola to our rotation. Our history there, we've raised a lot of Kentucky bluegrass seed in the past, and we've shifted away from that right now. And so, we have pretty regular discussions about alternative crops and what to add to our rotation. I farm with my dad and my brother, and I have one of my 2 sons that have come back to the farm at this point in time. My brother has 3 boys, the last of which he just added in June. So the 5th generation, there's possibility of five sons in the operation. And it's kind of interesting that Don mentioned Australia. My son there in the far side of the picture, Greg, he is currently in Australia. And he's visiting some people that we've met over the years, and one of the persons that he's visiting has developed a haying and feed business, and they're raising alfalfa and recently added Timothy, and they've got a pelletizing or a cubing operation going. And he texted me here a little while ago, and he says, "Dad, we need to get a cuber, and we need to get a press for canola, and we're going to take the meal and we'll put it into cubes with our off-quality hay, and we're all set." So it's kind of interesting that you'd mentioned that. We tried our first attempt at seeding a fall canola in the spring, late springtime. In 2013 was our first try, and we used the variety called Amanda out of University of Idaho. It was seeded on the 6th of June, at a rate of 4 pounds to the acre. And this particular photo was taken in August. This chart here shows the different animals that we put on there, the different dates, and how long they were on there. And when I added all that up, I kind of surprised myself at the value that I put on that amount of grazing. And I reran the numbers and I thought, oh, it can't be that high, you know, and I kind of subtract a little bit, but this $80 to $90 is pretty real. I was amazed at that. This is what it looked like in September. The cattle really worked it over pretty good. There were a lot of leaves out there, and when we first turned them out there, they kind of looked at us like, you want us to eat that stuff, you know? And luckily, this particular field here had some eyebrows and rock outcroppings and a little bit of timbered area that had some grass and so forth in it, so they could kind of slowly adjust to eating it, and it gave them the dry matter that they needed for their total ration. This here is a photo of the field that we seeded this last spring. We did it in June also, and this time we switched to a Roundup Ready variety, and we just wanted to have that option to be able to go in and control weeds when and if they showed up. I go back to that and discuss this just a little bit. I didn't track the amount of time that we had the animals on this particular field as well as the previous year. We ended up with 2 consecutive mornings we went out and we had a dead cow laying out there in this particular instance, and we're assuming nitrate poisoning, but we're not sure. The symptoms look that way, and it was kind of surprising from the standpoint that when we seed this canola, we don't put any fertilizer down with it. We intend to fertilize it in after it goes through the winter and put on all of our fertilizer in the spring was our intentions. So it was kind of surprising to think that maybe there was some nitrate poisoning, but it could be that the plant's scavenging nitrogen that's leached down far enough that other crops haven't accessed it. There's another little experiment that we did. We had a field that we have seeded to Roundup Ready canola, or alfalfa, excuse me, the year before. This field has about 45 of the last 50 years it's been in Kentucky bluegrass, and it has some low pH areas. It has shallow ground. It probably has a residual carryover of several different rather harsh chemicals to try to take out grassy weeds and so forth. So needless to say, we didn't get 100% stand when we seeded the alfalfa. And so we had these thin areas, and we were kind of brainstorming as to what to do about the thin areas. And we decided to go out there with a mix of canola and triticale and oats and just kind of run over almost the entire field. Wherever there was real good stand of alfalfa, we would turn the drill off. But this actually worked out to be a rather interesting experiment. And so when the alfalfa, it was fairly mature when we finally did make hay out of it. It had some blooms on it and stuff, but we waited because of the weather. So it was July 24th when we were out there swathing it. And we'd been told by a lot of people that canola has such a high moisture content and so forth that it's hard to make hay out of it. But I think in this particular blend, it actually worked out well. Well, then the next thing is are the animals going to eat the stuff? Kind of just a fairly long stem and large diameter, a few leaves on it and so forth. And we fed it to both our cattle, and my wife raises horses and fed it to the horses. And I'm just amazed, especially with the horses. They eat every last bit of it, including the big stems and so forth. So I was really quite surprised, and it was a relatively easy and quick way to spruce up a field that we wanted to make forage out of, and it increased our yield quite substantially over had we not done anything to it. Some of the observations that I have, the Amanda in 2013, that was as close to a perfect winter kill as I think I've ever seen. You really had to look hard to find a live plant the following spring. And I know in talking to some other people that have more experience with raising winter canola, they said that that particular winter was the harshest winter that they've ever had. And you know, I was talking to some guys that have been raising winter canola for 25 years. So judging by what I see when I left home to come down here, we have canola that's alive out in that field from 2014. Another observation is it's pretty tough to have an entire field or pasture that's 100% canola and get enough other fiber in the cow's diet. We tried it with putting hay out there, but you know, they've got a nice green plant to go chew on. Why do they want to eat dry hay? And so the first year, that field that the Amanda was on, like I said, it had grassy areas out in the field, and it worked out great. It was just a perfect blend. One of the other ideas that we've had is if you're going to have an entire field and you don't have the option of these grassy strips and eyebrows and that sort of stuff, is I've wondered what would happen if you have your water trough placed at the far end of the field, and then you plant an area next to the water trough and coming out towards the canola, if you plant that to something like a forage triticale, and then put the canola on the far end. And they, you know, going to and from the water trough, they're always going to walk through the forage grain and hopefully, you know, pick up the fiber that they need there. That's one idea that we thought. You know, there's been a lot of talk about cover crops, and I'm kind of wondering whether this method fits the cover crop category, and you just don't have to destroy it in the fall. You know, after you've received the forage off of it and kind of or mowed it back or whatever, then goes through the winter, and I'm thinking that it's going to save a few operations, and maybe we'll receive pretty much the same benefits. Obviously, we don't have the mix of different varieties of plants out there, but anyway, just kind of an idea. Another observation, and I've heard other people talk about this too, is that when you first start feeding the cattle, they obviously take a little bit of time to get used to it, but it is something that they remember. The second year when we put them out there, they took right to the canola and ate it real well right from the beginning. So, like in our situation, we obviously would plant a lot more acres of canola than what we would have cattle to graze. So I'm wondering if there isn't a way to plant like a Roundup Ready canola and plant it with triticale, and then at some point in there, cut it for hay, make a dry hay out of it, and possibly if it regrows to the point where you felt there was too much growth going into fall, that you'd go out there with a mower and mow it off, or you know, do something, a mechanical method rather than utilizing cattle. But once again, that hay that's taken off of there would be something that would work for cattle feed. Another thing that I found quite interesting in 2013, this is what, you know, we had some late fall rains, and this is what the volunteer canola looked like. And with it being a Roundup Ready variety, if a person did have cheatgrass or some other weeds and stuff that came out there, you know, it's relatively inexpensive to put a little bit of Roundup on it and clean it up. So anyway, it makes a person think. the deer absolutely loved that stuff. It was unbelievable. A 500-acre field, and not exaggerating, I bet you could drive from one side to the other and count 200 head of deer. This particular field is located pretty close to the Spokane Valley, so there's not really any hunting pressure or anything that goes on there, and just unbelievable. So I guess we'll take questions at the end, but thank you.
Okay, I need to start out with a few questions for you. So in this audience, how many of you already grow oil seeds? I know Randy does. Anybody else? Let me look. 20%? I need this for the video. I need to tell them what I'm seeing. All right. Next, how many people in the room raise livestock? Randy, you're in there. That's maybe 35% or so. And now I'm going to categorize a little bit. How many have you at least 10 of livestock? And we're going to assume that's probably not the same group of people. Now I'm going to go a little bit bigger. And how many of you have at least 50 head? Well, that narrows it down a little bit, maybe 20% or so. And then lastly, how many of you are feeding oil seeds to your livestock? Randy's one. You're doing it also. Anybody else? Okay, I'm doing that, so there's 3 of us in this room that are doing that. All right, our operation is called Little Canaan Ranch. It's just a small one. We direct market, so we run about 10 to 50 head of cattle, and we definitely feed the canola meal. We feed it to our livestock the entire hay feeding season. So from October 15th to April 15th, we're feeding canola meal with our hay. And what we feed specifically is called expeller press canola meal. There's, just as for those of you that aren't aware, there's basically 2 categories. There's the ones that there's canola meal that's been solvent extracted with hexane, and that only has about 2% residual oil in it. And then there's expeller press canola meal, which, as Don was pointing out, can have anywhere from 12% to 18% oil in it. And we use it because that combination of hay, our hay is terrible. We have meadow foxtail for hay, not very good to feed your cattle, but if you add canola meal to their ration, and we're adding it at about 10% of their daily intake, so 3 pounds per day during nasty weather, over the winter. And what we see is that we get great weight gains during the winter time. And this allows us to slaughter our beef in February, which is when we like to do it, and when our customers like to do it. And those people would say, well, you're going to normally do it later than that if you're in the custom market. But it really works out nicely. We get the biggest weight gain during that time period. And the real important one, and this is definitely subjective, but the average quality of our beef is higher now than before we started feeding canola meal. We started about 5 years ago, 6 years ago, I can't remember quite when. But after we started, we have not had any of our beef come in less than top choice. So it's really, this is not sent out to a lab for testing, but this is just our butcher evaluating it. And he just loves the way our beef looks and it's got to be the canola meal because that's the only real thing we changed in this whole formula. Okay, so insanity strikes. We purchased a canola press. So I don't know if you remember, there was a guy by the name of Victor Khayyam in the 1970s. He said he liked Remington shavers so much he bought the company. Well, we like canola meal so much we bought a press, and I'm going to show you a video now. This is a description of a process that converts canola seed this is a little canola seed with some barley straw in it, to canola meal and canola oil. It starts with a load of canola, which you can see here in the back of a dump truck. It is conveyed via this screw auger up into the high parts of the barn, slides, and there's a motor there. You can see that power cord. And it slides down that chute into the feed hopper. Now the feed hopper has a weigh scale underneath it that's connected to the computer that runs this process. And when it gets low, it tells that conveyor to turn on and fill the hopper back up. The hopper feeds into a tube which feeds the canola press. There is the tube coming down through the ceiling, and that is the canola press. So that's basically a motor driving a screw that compresses that canola under very harsh conditions, and then that at the end of it is a heater that heats it even hotter. Now the oil that comes out of it drops straight down through this tube, and I'll try to slide this tube down so you can see the oil dripping downward. And then the canola meal goes out through this tube, and I'll show you that in a moment. Now the oil itself is very cool coming out of here. It's only about 75 or 80 degrees, so it's considered cold pressed oil. And the meal is heated up fairly warm, probably about 230 or 240 degrees. And that helps drive out the residual oil, and then it goes into a bulk bag. We'll get to that in a moment, but let's go through the oil process. Now the oil drops down this tube into this drum, and I'm going to change this drum to a different type of container so it's a food grade system rather than just an industrial. But basically there's a level sensor on the left which is measuring the level of oil in that tank, and when the oil gets up to a certain level, this pump is turned on by the computer. It pumps it out of the tank through this manifold which watches the pressure so we don't get an overpressure. If there's a too high a pressure or too low a pressure, the computer will shut the pump down. The oil goes through this filter, and from the filter goes up and out through that opening over there. Now there's a little fan there that blows warm office air through a tube that is concentrically around the oil tube, and then that big white tube up there is that outer tube, and it goes over and down, and then I select which of these tanks I put oil into. As you can see, the one on the right is full, the one behind it is full, and now this one is being filled. The canola meal we talked about coming through the wall is feeding down this chute and into this bag where we collect the canola meal. The weight is being watched on that scale over there, and when if the weight gets to the shutoff level, it will shut the system down so that we don't overfill the bag. It'll also watch for abnormal weight gathering. In other words, if the weight doesn't accumulate fast enough, I know there's some other problems, and based on that, I'll turn off the conveyor so that we don't end up with a mess on the floor. So that is a real short description of the process. Thank you. So we did that, and then the question you have to ask is, well, I ask myself this question a lot. I only use 4 tons per year. Why in the world would I spend all that money on a canola press? And probably don't have real good justification, but I'll try to justify it. First of all, it's really important to our business plan. I mean, we feel that it really helps produce good, high-quality beef, and we could buy it from Steve Camp, but we really wanted to have it under our own control, so that was one reason. Now, this is the geek in me. I automate manufacturing equipment processes for a living. And I've always wanted to do something on my own place. I mean, I've always had some things going automatic-wise, but I wanted to do something more complicated, and this was a really good challenge. Because it's one thing to automate a process that you have an employee watching all the time. It's another one to have a process that runs 24 hours around the clock without having anybody watch it. And you find out real quickly that you miss a lot of things. And all of a sudden you have a mess on the floor, and one time a pipe came loose and the canola just came pouring into the office, the seeds. I had 4 inches on the floor of the office before I got it stopped. And actually, after all the disasters, it works pretty well now. I have to spend about a half an hour with it every day, just mostly just going down that dump truck and spreading it around the conveyor so it stays filled. I can't wait to move it into a grain silo to make it a lot easier to handle. But overall, it was a lot of fun to do. That's another reason. And I really do want to help the market grow. And one of the best ways to help the market grow is to invite your neighbors over to see this Rube Goldberg running and offer them a beer and then talk about it. And it's amazing. You know, I've generated a lot of interest. I have a number of people who want to start using canola meal due to this. Now, if I could only have them help me with the oil side of the equation, that would be better. To make this business a success for farmers and for cattlemen and for anybody else who's interested in it, we have to get a good price for both the oil and the meal. The oil, if you're trying to sell it for a biodiesel feedstock right now, you've got a terrible business plan. I mean, look at the price of diesel. It doesn't make any sense. You got to sell oil for at least $2.50 a gallon to even begin to break even in this scenario. And oil for biodiesel must be going at about $1.50 per gallon. I haven't talked to anybody since I've been here, but it can't be doing well. So there needs to be better uses for oil, and that's what I'd like to talk to the university people about. I think there's some things we can do. But then the other thing is I'm trying to help educate cattle people and anybody else who's using it for whatever livestock that it's worth more than you think it is. It's not just worth well, I'll get to it next slide, actually. I mean, that's putting a value on the canola meal. And one of the basic ways you can value it is what's the protein content. And if it's, you know, whatever its protein content is, that's its value. But is there something more? And if it's just a source of protein, and you use alfalfa being about 18% protein, and in Winton County it goes for about $150 a ton. So, and dairy quality is 200, but we're just going to use regular 150-ton alfalfa. That would mean a canola at 36% protein, which I can't even produce, but let's say it's 36% protein, works out to $300 per ton. So that would be the basic price that how they would look at it. And it's real easy to convince the cattlemen to swap this protein source for another protein source. But my argument is there's a lot more to it. This expeller press canola oil is an excellent source of fat. Now, as low as 11%, and unfortunately in my case, it's about as high as 18% because I'm having troubles getting more oil out. But there's a lot of value in that oil. And Don touched on this, and that's the extra energy. There is a lot of energy in that oil, and you can adjust your ration to really boost the energy for the animal. And in addition to that, besides the extra energy, for people in the dairy business, there's a lot of data that shows that the oil increases milk production. Not too important to me in the beef side, but for dairy people it would be. An interesting study was that it increases cold tolerance for newborn calves. If you feed canola to the bred mothers for the last 60 days before birthing, they have a lot better resistance to cold. Now, I fall calf, it doesn't matter to me, but if you're a winter calver and it could save the life of one or two of your calves, that might make a big difference. The improved beef quality, I mentioned earlier, that's a subjective opinion. I'd like to see more actual true data on that. And then lastly, Don talked about the omega-6 to omega-3 ratio. Being a healthy 3-to-1 in canola oil. When you feed cattle that, it actually comes through in the meat. You can see a difference, and if you analyze for it, you'll find it's got a healthier composition. And that's a real quick run through this. And then I just say if you're a meal customer or another meal producer, or whether you put in your own meal pressing operation or not, please give canola meal a try. You will like it. Thank you.
Okay, the question was, what did I use for an animal unit value to come up with that total dollars per acre return off of grazing the canola? What I did was I kind of used a rough number of about $25 or 25 pounds of feed per day per animal, and did a lot like his figures where, compared it against the value of hay, and just came up with X number of pounds of hay for that number of animals, and put a value on it as if it was hay, as if that was an alternative. If we didn't have that to graze and we had to feed them hay, that's what the value would have been. What do you think of that method? Oh, the question is, will we harvest the crop the following year, or are we just using it for grazing and a cover crop? We intend to harvest it, and what we will do is go in this spring and put on our fertilizer and take it all the way to harvest. And I know that the winter canolas have the potential to produce quite a bit more yield than the spring canolas, and so I'm looking for 3/4 of a improvement, maybe a double the improvement on the yield, and couple that with the value of the grazing and all that. I hope that we come out better than raising 2 crops of 2 spring crops or something put together. The question was, could we figure out whether there was damage done to the plant by the animals? And no, because that never went to crop, we couldn't tell what the damage was. The question was, what did we use for fencing? We lucked out that both of the fields that we used had permanent fence around them already, and it was of a New Zealand style fence, and we were able then to connect on. If we were going to do some concentrated grazing in certain areas, we were able to hook on with a temporary wire and see what some concentrated grazing did versus grazing the entire field. I don't know for some reason we don't have a great deal of problem with the deer on the temporary fence. The question was, did we ration out the field or graze the whole field? My preference would be to graze the whole field if we could. The challenge there is to supplement the diet with some fiber of a different source so that they're not eating 100% canola. And that was the idea that I talked about, where maybe half the field gets planted to a cereal crop, and you do it with the strategy that the animals have to walk through the cereal crop in order to get to the canola, that maybe then it would blend their diet. But I'm always looking for a way that requires the least amount of labor and management. It'd be nice to be able to turn them out on pasture and let them be pretty much self-sufficient.
So, Don, my question is on the ensiling. You mentioned that you had to inoculate it. Now, when we do alfalfa and we ensile it, we don't inoculate. Do you foresee that we would have to inoculate the canola forage?
In our project, just to be on the safe side, we are inoculating. A lot of these bacteria are present in nature, and so you may get some benefit, but we just do it as a standard practice. Okay, but I mean, silage has been around for eons. I mean, literally, to medieval times, and so they didn't have inoculants back in those days. So,
excuse me. The question is, what am I doing with my canola oil? And that is the million-dollar question. I've already written off trying to use it as a biodiesel source because of the economics of it. It's fortunate for me, in my particular case, that the company I work for in Wyoming, it's a company that does water treatment of fracking water. And they have a bioreactor as a part of that process, and they need a vegetable oil for foam control. And so they're buying my oil for foam control. That works out very nicely, but we need to come up with other uses. It's a great, by the way, it tastes wonderful. I don't know if you've ever tasted cold pressed canola oil, but it does not taste like canola oil at all. It's a very fruity type of a taste, but as much as I'd like to sell it as a food grade product, as a matter of fact, I had the WSDA out and inspected my operation with the new oil collector that I installed after that video was shot. And they said I could be a food grade operation. But we also met with our lawyer, and, and he said that, you know, you're really going to have to probably carry a specialized insurance for this. And all of a sudden you go, well, if I got to carry $3,000 or $4,000 of insurance to sell this small amount of oil, it really starts to make little sense. So we need help from the point of view of universities of saying, what can we do as a defoamer applications? What can we do as dust suppressants? I mean, this stuff is going to biodegrade like a bandit, so it's not a bad way to use it. It's just for dust suppression.
Mm-hmm.
But right now, I'm fortunate. I don't know about anybody else as far as what they would do. I know that Steve Camp is using all of his as biodiesel. He runs everything on his farm on biodiesel.
Mm-hmm. I've got a quick one for Keith. Your farm-pressed canola meal is a high-fat product. What do you think the shelf life of that is?
It's actually very good. There's personal opinion, and then there's one study that I saw from a PhD thesis out of Italy. And that study showed where they stored the canola meal at basically 100 degrees Fahrenheit for a month. And there was no degradation in the canola meal at all during that time period. So, and then for us personally, I've just found that it lasts really well. As a sort of a backup plan, I throw a little bit of like a pound or two of dry ice on every bag at the beginning of summer to displace oxygen out of the bag. And that would slow down any oxidation issues. You have to remember that when you cold press canola, there's a large amount of vitamin E in canola oil, fresh canola oil. That once it's been processed, a lot of that vitamin E has been destroyed. But when you cold press it, there's still a lot in there, and some of that vitamin E ends up on the meal side too, and it acts as an antioxidant. So for both the oil and for the meal, there's a large antioxidant present.